Who am I?
Dad.
Yeah, my daddy. Who's that?
Mom.
Mama. And who are you?
Maya.
Oh, that's your favorite word?
Maya.
Maya. Maya. That's my daughter, Maya.
Maya.
Can you say hello?
Hiya.
She just turned 20 months old, which for people who resent this weird month-by-month age scheme that parents use, I'll just say she's a little past a year and a half old. And I remember when she was born, she was, she was cute and we loved her, but she mostly just sat there and whined, honestly. But then eventually, like you could see it, her eyes just opened up to the world. She was taking it all in. And then she started to crawl, then to walk, then sang a few sounds that we desperately convinced ourselves meant something. And now this kid's running around and figuring things out faster than I ever expected. And that includes words. What are some of your favorite words?
Bacon.
Bacon. You've never said bacon before. One of her first words popped up when we'd go for walks in the neighborhood, and she'd see someone walking their dog and say,
Go.
She was fond of saying ball,
Ball.
and plenty of other things that we still don't quite understand.
Over.
I got her with my microphone here to show her some animals on the computer. What does a dog say? That's woof woof. I also showed her a lion. What's that?
Go.
Is that what lions say? And we looked at some elephants. That's elephant. She's walking around this whole house this fall shouting pumpkin or pumpkin at everyone that she sees. And she's asking for her favorite foods, which includes cheese and cereal.
Yeah.
And shouting no to our cat. And okay, I know I'm doing this dad thing where I'm making a lot out of some pretty rudimentary words. And I get it. We agree. My daughter's a genius, obviously. But I don't know, maybe still you're not impressed. But I think you should be. Not just at my kid, but at the fact that any of us can do this at all. Our mouths make these weird little sounds that we string together to construct meaning. Like ideas in my head can end up in your head because we both have language. Eventually, Maya's going to be able to tell stories, give concrete commands, and manipulate my wife and I to do her bidding. Just because her brain has been picking up these sounds and how we use them. Understanding how this all works is a monumental task, but philosophers, linguists, psychologists, they've been chipping away at it for ages. So what do we know about what we do with words? And whether other people have any idea what it is we're talking about? You're listening to Opinion Science, the show about our opinions, where they come from, and how they change. I'm Andy Luttrell, and this week I'm excited to share my conversation with Tom Holtgraves. This one's unique because Tom's office is just a few doors down from mine at Ball State University, and he's been a great friend and colleague since I started working there in 2017. Also, I think this is the first in-person conversation to air on the podcast, which is pretty cool. There are a few more coming, but after a couple of years of remote interviews, it was fun to actually be in the same room as the person I was talking to. Anyhow, Tom studies the social psychology of language, how we use words in a social context. He edited the Oxford Handbook of Language and Social Psychology, and his book, Language as Social Action, came out in 2002. He's interested in how we use words to convey meaning and what has to happen for other people to pick up on what we intend to communicate, especially when we're prone to making some points pretty indirectly. You know what I mean? We talked last spring about some of the major themes of his work, including speech act theory, which I thought was an interesting way to think about what we do with language. So let's get into it. For as long as I've known you and have had a loose sense of what your research is, it's actually not until the last few days that I've really been okay, what does it actually look like? And so I do have questions just for myself about what you're doing. And maybe just to get into it, I don't think I know the Tom Holtgraves origin story as well as I'd like to, which is why language? Why is it interesting to you to figure out how people use language to talk to each other?
So it's a result of several things. So as an undergraduate, for social psychology, I had Roger Brown's textbook. I don't know if you're familiar.
Mm-mm.
This is a classic book. This is, I think it's 1965, 1966. And Roger Brown is just this wonderful writer. And it's unlike current social psych intro books. But so he had a chapter on dissonance, chapter on language. And he writes so well, brilliantly. He writes, it's like reading a New Yorker article, right? So so that kind of got me hooked on social, but also on language too, because that, he was one of the, he mentored Steven Pinker. So language development, language acquisition, he was huge, but he also had an interest in social psychology of language. Did stuff on politeness, did stuff on address forms. Anyway, so there was that. And then as a graduate student, I was sort of floundering.
So you didn't go to grad school wanting to do?
No, I went to graduate school wanting to study gambling.
Oh.
Yeah, risk-taking.
Is that what brought you to Reno?
Yeah. Right. And so that was, and I did that stuff, and I continued to dabble in that. I'll publish some stuff on that. But it wasn't panning out. And then I started working with Deborah Davis, Ohio State grad, Ohio State postdoc. And she was doing this, she was studying this phenomenon that she developed. Who was it with? Tom Ostrom, but that wasn't the main person. Anyway, the phenomenon was responsiveness, right? And so they had these lab studies where people would actually pleasure one another, and they were looking at, how quickly they would do this and all these sorts of things. Anyway, so that's the concept, and it's so she started applying it to conversations. So when you're having a conversation with somebody, are you in sync? Are you right? And the feeling, right? That sometimes somebody's just saying random stuff. And so I started working with her on that. And we started doing these studies where we were looking at responsiveness in terms of responding to interview questions. So we came up with this method of manipulating the background questions, keeping the answers the same, but manipulating the questions that preceded them, and looked at the implications of violating responsiveness, or later what other people refer to as relevance, on perceptions of the person, perceptions of what they're saying. Anyway, in working on that, I got into the pragmatics literature, and so there's this theory of relevance. Sperber and Wilson. This is cognitive science, right? I mean, you maybe heard of it, but so this was actually before Sperber and Wilson. So Grice was the big one. Sorry. So one of his conversational maxims is relevant. So I started reading that stuff, and then that got me in to speech act theory. And so then I went down this rabbit hole of philosophy of language, and really pragmatics is what it is, right? I mean, so I'm a social psychologist, but really what I am is an experimental somebody who studies pragmatic phenomenon experimentally.
So, but what is that? I don't know what that means. Pragmatics?
Pragmatics. Okay, so if you look at language as so if you arbitrarily divide up language, there's semantics, so roughly the meaning of words, right? There's syntax, right? So the rules for combining those items into something meaningful, but that's not enough, right? Because when we communicate with one another, we're obviously communicating a lot more than you get from just looking at semantics and syntax. So pragmatics for me, and many pragmatic theorists would disagree with this, but for me, pragmatics is everything beyond syntax and semantics. The question is, of course, how they interact, right? So when you're actually engaged, when you're actually processing communications, when you're processing language, and there's what's called the semantics pragmatics war, because right, because at what I mean, so sort of the one idea is that you comprehend sort of a literal meaning, and then you take context into account, and you go, but that's not the way it really works, right? So if you're looking at online processing, and using, like, for example, EEG techniques, if you have, so let's say you manipulate the status of a speaker. So it's a high powered, or let's say a low powered speaker, and they say they're saying something very impolite, right? That they shouldn't be doing. Listeners pick up on that almost immediately, and so there's pragmatic stuff comes in really, really, really fast. So anyway, what is pragmatics? Pragmatics is, for me, it's everything beyond semantics and syntax, but it's mostly, it's about meaning. It's what people are.
But not semantic meaning.
No, not semantic, because obviously semantics plays is a large part of it, but it's not. It doesn't get us very far, right? In terms of what we're actually doing when we're using language to communicate.
Is it sort of like if you think of the phenomenon of a backhanded compliment, where like what I'm saying is complimentary.
Yes.
However,
right.
that may not be what I mean, or you may not think that's what I mean, and you go, "Well, I know you're saying this, but think
what you really mean is
right.
no, I don't." And you get deniability. There's layers of meaning, right? And many, so backhanded compliments, humble bragging, right? There's layer upon layer, and it gets, it can get really complex. But those are the sorts of things that fall within the domain of pragmatics.
Gotcha. Yeah. And so the notion of speech acts, that's the thing. What does Tom study? I think speech acts.
Right.
That's what comes to mind. And it wasn't until recently that I really, appreciated what those are.
Yeah.
But I might have it wrong. So tell me, what is the notion of a speech act?
So speech act, this comes out of philosophy, the natural language philosophy. So you can take this. So John Searle would be probably a major contemporary philosopher in that regard. Before him, John Austin, who was British. You can take it back to Wittgenstein. It's all about how we look at language, how we think about language, and it is an approach to language that is, rather than looking at language as being a truth conditional sort of phenomenon where you evaluate language in terms of whether it corresponds to reality. Obviously, that's part of it, but speech act theory is the idea that we use language to do things, right? So one of Austin's books is Things We Do with Words, right? And so it's an action view, right? And so it works really well for me and for other people in terms, it's sort of a wedge, for me anyway, to look at how we communicate and miscommunicate. So you can specify exactly what it is that somebody is trying to do when they're using language.
Can you give examples of things people do with words?
So they ask questions.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So there's layers here. What we're talking about is what's called the illocutionary layer. Request, beg, criticize, apologize, thank, assert. There's books that are compilations of speech acts, right? And we're talking about verbs. So speech act verbs. These are actions that a speaker is intending to have recognized, right? So when I criticize a student, I'm intending.
Funny your mind went there.
I'm intending for them to recognize my intention to criticize them, and I've successfully communicated if they recognize that intention. So it's called a reflexive intention. So speech acts are these discrete actions that people perform with their utterances. Right? There's many weaknesses, right? But it works well for certain things, I think.
Is the general gist of speech act theory, or at least the modern version of it, that anything we say falls into some speech act? Whatever we're saying is in the service of doing something?
Yes, but I don't think that's true. Okay. Right? You many times communicate. We talk just. It's like grooming. We're not trying to do anything. We're just sort of, getting to know somebody. And that can be a speech act in a sense. But no, so it kind of breaks down. So no, it's not the. I don't think it's the case that we're intending to perform a specific action with every utterance.
So we don't speak with purpose always.
Not always. I mean, unless you look at a higher level. So I want to affiliate with this person, right? And that. But that's a little different. That's a higher level, right?
That any of these speech acts could be in service of.
Could yes, yeah. So you're asking questions. So how's it going? So you're right. You're doing those sorts of things. And another weakness of speech act theory is that it's totally utterance based, right? But many times we perform speech acts over a sequence, right? I mean, think about a request, right? Instead of inviting somebody, have dinner with me, you say, "Are you free Friday?" Right? So it's sort of what's called a pre-request or a pre-invitation. And if they say no, then no request, right? Or if they say, "Oh yeah, I am," okay. So these are moves and so it happens over a sequence of turns. But speech act theory generally doesn't deal with that. Other approaches do. But.
It's so funny because as a newcomer to this, I'm very excited about it.
Okay.
And as someone who studied it for a long time, you're quick to say, it's not great. Because I do think that in that, even in the sequence, it kind of seems like each of those utterances do have their own goal, right?
They do.
Are you free? I'm soliciting information.
Right.
Then I follow up. Right. Would you like to have dinner? Yeah. I'm making now a request. But
the original intent was a request.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I mean, you're absolutely right. There's speech acts that are sort of subsidiary speech acts to the main speech act, right?
So I have an example that I liked from your book, which I started reading several pages of.
Oh, cool.
Which was the difference between the subtle difference in the letters in the words, but the big difference in speech act, which is the difference between I apologize and I apologized.
Yeah.
Where if I understand right, the idea is like those two sound like almost identical expressions. Yeah. But the first is in the service of apologizing.
Yeah, that is a speech act,
and the second is in the service of sort of describing some truth statements, right? Like I'm giving you information.
Yeah, exactly.
And that I just thought really nicely makes that distinction, right? Where you go, we just sort of say words all the time.
I know.
And they don't always seem that different, but they're serving different goals.
Exactly.
And that's the notion of speech act.
That's interesting you found that. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Yeah. And I hereby apologize. There's what's called a hereby test, right? So to identify a speech act verb, you have to be able to say, this breaks down a little bit, but I hereby, whatever it is, I hereby request, I hereby promise, I hereby apologize, and so on. It breaks down a little bit for things like, maybe we can get into this later. I'm going to hold off on that.
Well, hold on. I want to. Now you got me curious.
Well, I was going to start bringing up persuasion.
Oh, sure.
Right. So, because persuasion is an interesting speech act, right? So, if I'm intending to persuade somebody, right? I mean, I can't say I hereby persuade you, right? That just doesn't work. I can still have the intention, and I can say things with the intention of trying to persuade somebody. But interestingly, if they recognize my intention to persuade, that can backfire, right? I mean, that's when you get and you're the persuasion guy, wouldn't that be the case? I mean, wouldn't it be more effective if I'm trying to persuade somebody for them not to recognize my intention, right?
Yeah, in communication, they have what they call the persuasion knowledge model, which is exactly this, where like people have developed knowledge about how persuasion works.
Yeah.
And once they recognize that that's your intention, suddenly they go, I see what you're doing here.
Yeah,
you're trying to manipulate me.
Yeah.
I'm not simply getting information from you. And so that's an interesting case because speech act theory seems like, or at least the extensions of it for understanding are like the hope is that you do understand my intention.
Exactly.
Like that's the whole premise.
By definition, you have to for it to be successful. But persuasion is one case where it doesn't work. Another case is brag. I hereby brag. Right? I mean, to successfully brag, you don't want the person to recognize you're bragging. Hence, humble brag. Right? So, and those are the two exceptions. And they're interesting exceptions because they're studied by psychologists, social psychologists. I'm sure there's others, but those are kind of
Yeah, where the desire is misunderstanding.
Yeah,
almost, right?
exactly. You want to basically hide the intention,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's not that you're trying to deceive or anything, but well, I guess in some ways you are, but you're trying to hide your intention to accomplish something.
So it sort of brings us to that notion of misunderstanding. It seems like kind of a major theme in what you've been doing, at least lately.
Recently, that's
trying to figure out when do these communication processes break down?
Yeah,
and the Speech Act model is kind of a useful framework to be like.
That's why. Yes, exactly, exactly.
Like I can tell, I can identify what the intention was,
exactly,
and then I can measure whether it was successful.
Exactly right. Makes it tractable.
So in a study, like how do you actually catch understanding and misunderstanding?
Yeah, so the framework we use, and we've used this in a lot of different ways now. With the Speech Act, we've used it with emotions, we've used it with describing uncertainty. But with Speech Acts, so we have one set of participants, and we'll give them a situation. Imagine your roommate hasn't cleaned the apartment in a long time, and it's a mess, right? And you want to criticize them, right? That's the intention, right? So what would you say? They write it out, right? Or you want to promise to do better, or you want to, whatever it is. And we typically work with 30 to 40 speech acts. So it's one of the, I think, best things about what I'm doing now is that it's very broad, right? So we're trying to, it's not just requests, it's a whole bunch of speech acts. Anyway, so they'll write out what they would say, and then we take those and what they would say, and we show to another group, another participant. We say, what does this person mean? What are they doing, right? Sometimes it'll be open-ended, just give us a word. Sometimes we'll give them multiple choice, right? And it's hard, right? But anyway, that's the basic procedure. And so if they correctly identify, criticize, use my example, that's communication. If they do not, then it's miscommunication. Okay. So that's the basic setup. We've used, and it works really, really well. I mean, it's a little unrealistic in a sense, but
it captures, I think, like the essence of what we care about.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
I could see being in that situation of being like, I really want to convey to you that I don't approve of what you're doing.
Exactly.
And do you get the message when I express myself the way I chose to?
Exactly right. That's exactly right. And just to follow up on that, of course, one of the main findings we get is that so to criticize somebody is hard. It is, in our terms, face threatening. And that's where we see the lower rates of communication, right? However people are phrasing that, it's not being picked up by the other person, right?
So can you describe face threat a little bit?
So face threat is, this comes from Irving Goffman. He borrowed it from Chinese writings, but it's the idea of the image that all of us have. Goffman's ideas of face are that people mutually attend to one another's face. And it's sort of a social contract, an interactional contract, right? So we're mutually involved. I mean, we obviously threaten one another's face, but we sort of buy into this cooperativeness to maintain each other's face. And so anything, and then we get into modern sociolinguistic theories of face. Go to Durkheim and make distinction between positive face and negative face. So negative face is basically autonomy. We want to be free to do what we want. So if you make a request of somebody, or even more threatening, demand somebody do something, that's face threatening, right? Positive face is more along the lines of image, right? And so to criticize somebody is to threaten their positive face, their image, right? And so criticisms obviously threaten that, and consequently, people are not direct in their criticisms, right? I mean, they can be, right?
They don't care about face.
If they don't care about face. And some people don't, but most of us do, right? And so consequently, what happens is that message doesn't get communicated. And that's one of the main findings that comes out of that research.
So I'm just going to reframe, just to make sure I get it.
Right.
So it kind of seems like this is a problem of competing goals, right? Like on the one hand, I have the goal to communicate my criticism of you.
Yep.
On the other hand, I have the goal not to insult your reputation or insult your freedom to do what you please.
That's exactly right.
And so it's almost like the problem is people try to actually do both at the same time, but they can't. Like something's got to give. Like I cannot both criticize you and make you feel like you're wonderful.
That's right. That's right.
Like those cannot happen at the same time.
That's right.
And so people sort of go, well, I'll fudge it and I'll sort of indirectly communicate this. And maybe I succeed in helping you save face. But I haven't actually succeeded in communicating my criticism.
That's exactly right. And there's variability. I mean, some people are good at conveying criticism in a base supportive manner. So it's a skill. And I think as instructors, that's one of the skills we strive to develop to varying degrees, right? But you're right. That you described it perfectly. It is these sort of competing goals that we try to satisfy simultaneously, and there's a parallel, and so language, many aspects of language, there are multiple motivations for. So one of the things, just to shift a little bit, same paradigm, but actually pretty similar paradigm. So if we're communicating our beliefs about something that's uncertain. So it's communicating uncertainty, right? And so there's all sorts of words. I call them uncertainty terms, but these are basically what pragmatics people call scalar expressions. So some, right? But also probability terms. So other studies that we've done, rather than having people perform specific speech acts, we ask them to convey uncertainty. And we manipulate, again, threat, right? So imagine, you borrowed your dad's car, something bad happened. So low threat would be it needs a new battery. You got to tell your dad. High threat would be transmission. You got to tell your dad, right? So that's how we manipulate threat. And then we ask them, so how would, and then we also give them probability, some sort of probability information, right? And then we ask them how they would, how they express this. And so probability expressions, they are used for expressing uncertainty. Something's likely, something's possible, so on and so forth. But those have a range of meaning, right? But they're also used in the service of face management. So again, you've got multiple motivations, right? But anyway, the gist of the studies about uncertainty term is that, so we do the same thing. We'll say, so how would you say this? Then we take those utterances, give them to another group of subjects and say, what's the probability, right? That, that this is happening. And interestingly find that in more threatening situations, the probability estimates are actually less, right? Because it's being hedged in such a way that it's undermining the communication of the probability. But again, the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's multiple uses for certain types of words, right?
So in this case, the idea is like, if my dad's car almost definitely needs a major overhaul, when I come to tell him this, I may go, yeah, it seems like your car may need some work.
That's exactly right. And he's going to come away thinking, probably no big deal. But think of the implications of this for I think of things like, I use examples from Trump and before him Reagan, but think of Putin and his military advisors coming to him, right? So communicating uncertainty about Ukraine, but also not wanting to upset this guy. And so they're going to be hedging their communications to him. So Putin's coming away. I mean, I have no idea what Putin's thinking, but I mean, in my scenario, he's coming away with an estimate of the probability of something happening that's lower than what these guys are actually trying to communicate. Right?
Is the implication that like people in positions of power may generally have misunderstandings about a lot of this kind of thing?
Absolutely.
Because no one, I mean, it's like an emperor's new clothes situation, right? Like people aren't willing to reveal bad news.
Exactly.
And so you go around blindly thinking everything is great because you go, oh, people have mentioned maybe there's some problem somewhere, but like it doesn't seem like a big deal.
Yeah.
But no one's just willing to come out and say like, no, absolutely there is an issue.
That's right. And power is huge because power ties in directly to face. Right. So so somebody who's high in power, we're much more concerned about managing their face than vice versa. And so communication is directed upward, more likely to suffer from that sort of use of language that obscures the real intention, right?
Some of that also seems like not only your impression, but my impression of myself, right? Like if it's, I screwed up, there's a lot of baggage there in me saying I screwed up.
Oh, yeah.
And so I downplay like, oh, it seems as though I may have inadvertently.
Yeah. Well, you're protecting your own face, right? I mean, there's self-face, there's other face. Interesting cultural differences there, but yeah. So you're engaging in protecting your own face.
So I wanted to ask about the emoji wrinkle, which I think I first understood what you do in terms of like conveying understanding, because you were sort of embarking on this new research project on emoji. So what is the idea there, right? Like in a world where our communication is now different, right? Like I can't type something in my phone without my phone being like, do you want a picture of a boat? And I go, no, I just want to say the word boat. So like, what is it that these image related expressions are doing to our ability to communicate?
And so I got into it because emojis just baffle me. I get an emoji, like, I have no idea what's anyway. So, but no, the reason. So we look at emoji. This is not our idea. This is other people have written about this. That emoji are basically substitutes for this, right? For all the nonverbal stuff that we have, right? So when you're communicating digitally, you lose all that, right? So sarcasm gets missed, all that sort of stuff. And so emoji are, in a sense, a way. So people talk about emoji as communicating emotions, which they do, and as helping disambiguate. And that's what we focused on. And so again, face threat, right? So we're looking at what are called indirect replies. So you ask a question. This gets back to the relevance maxim. So what did you think of my talk? Oh, it's hard to give a good talk. Right? And so, and most people will get, doesn't have a very good opinion, right? And we've demonstrated that many times. But our interest was, okay, but when you're doing that face-to-face, you've got facial expressions, all that tone, you got all that going on. What we wanted to see is if emoji would serve that function digitally, right? So people would read those sorts of question-reply sequences with or without emoji. And then we're looking at how quickly they're comprehending the intended indirect meanings. That I don't like your talk so much. And we find very clearly that it works, and I think that it does, that it facilitates comprehension, recognition of that indirect meaning. But I think we found something even more interesting. I think we found with even just the emoji alone, and I can't remember how we picked the emoji. So what did you think of my presentation? Emoji. But I can't. I'm a little fuzzy on the details right now. But I think it was that. One of the things we're doing now is looking at emoji as performing speech acts, and so we're finding that's a thing.
So how could you use emoji to?
So so we ask people, imagine that you want to criticize set of speech acts, 30 speech acts, which emoji, and the problem with emoji is there's really a lack of consensus. You probably know this, right? I mean, people I mean, that's been, and even on fundamental dimensions like valence, you know, you'll get these wide yeah, I think it's positive. No, I think it's negative. So that's kind of interesting. But anyway, we basically ask people, and then we choose the emoji that, you know, is most often nominated for that speech act, and then we'll create these scenarios and put them in and see if people recognize, you know, what speech act is being performed, and they do. They do communicate, sort of like speech acts.
It would have seemed to me that emoji would not accomplish the job very well, right? Like, it seems like what you're saying is mostly that people are able to use those
They are able,
to
yeah.
get the meaning.
Yeah.
Whereas it might have seemed like that would be a cause for not conveying your intention, right? Like if my intention was to criticize your talk, and I send a winky face, I might be like, "Oh, this guy loved my talk," because there isn't that consensus about what these mean.
I know that's exactly right. With one of the things we did that JJ and I and a couple of other students is we looked at cultural differences in using emoji to manage face. And so not the specific intention, but just, you know, yeah, I didn't like your talk, smiley face. and what we predicted and found was that, and this goes back, that culturally people from collectivist cultures are more likely to manage face, more concerned, especially other face.
But other, got it.
We're all about self face, right? But they're about other face, and I think all of our scenarios were giving negative opinions or things to others, and we found that people from collectivist cultures were more likely to include emoji than people from individualistic cultures, but in the service of face management.
Cool.
So yeah.
So to pivot a little bit in terms of like my own interests and some of the themes of the podcast, I kept thinking about the ways in which we express our opinions, right? So like, it almost seems like maybe an underlying theme behind many speech acts is like a core interest in conveying some attitude, right? Like to criticize is essentially to express negative opinion of what you did. To thank is to express a positive attitude toward what you did. In the same way that we're talking about, like, did you like my talk, right? Like, I'm trying, how do I communicate this? And in some ways, the face-saving issue is there too. Like, we don't want to express negative opinions. So another example of this is not only an opinion of you, but an opinion of something you like. This happens to me, like, if people like a TV show, and I go, if I'm on the spot, I don't like the show this person loves, but I don't feel comfortable saying, "Oh, what a horrible show." I really think it's terrible.
Yeah.
And so that's another way in which I go, like, I need to somehow, I can't lie to you about my opinion, or maybe I do. Maybe that's the best way to do it. But I'm trying still to, you know, that's a way in which the goal might differ. Like some people have too strong a goal to express their opinion, and I go, I don't care. I'm going to tell you, I think it's garbage. And others go like, that's not my goal. My goal is more this sort of, I care about more our relationship more than I do expressing my own opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting. So objects that you're associated with. I mean, so face involves those things, right? I mean, because symbolically they are, right? And so you don't criticize other people's likes and dislikes, right? Positive face is about liking what other people like, right? So that's it's an interesting extension in that way. But there's differences too, though, right? I mean, and I've struggled to try to identify them. I mean, there are times when I will, you know, and not in a mean way, but just, you know, disagree about something like that, and I don't know why, you know, or with whom that happens. I've reflected on it, but can't come up with anything. But so I don't know.
Do we know much about the language of agreement and disagreement? Like in terms of words are for doing, right? It's a way in which we can sort of debate and confront and conflict or affiliate and agree. Do we know much about that?
We do. I mean, a fair amount. And a lot of it comes from sociolinguistics. There's a strong, like all the stuff on face, there's a strong preference for agreement. I did a study, this back when I was a postdoc. So this is mid 80s. And we wanted to see how people communicated face to face when they agreed and disagreed. So we recruited participants who were on opposite sides of abortion, gun rights, right? And so we put them in a room with a tape recorder. And we would say, you guys disagree on this, talk about it. And we recorded them, and just to see how did they do this. The pressure for agreement is so strong that even though we knew these people, they said, I'm pro, I'm anti, you wouldn't know it from their conversations, right? It's like, oh yeah, and I can't. And this is so far, so far back, I can't quite remember. One of the things that I mean, and then I'm overstating the case. They obviously disagreed sometimes, but even though they're doing that, they're simultaneously trying to manage face. So you get these sequences. So somebody will say something, and the other person will say yes. So not feigning, but agreeing, but. In fact, I wrote an article called Yes, But, right? Because that's a typical way in which you sort of acknowledge, yes, but, and you go on. And so this is one example. There's other sort of linguistic tricks that you see when people are, and that was a long time ago. My sense of the way people disagree now.
Well, what I wondered is, have the goals for face saving changed in the domains we use to communicate, right? Like, it seems like online
I know
is an arena where we go, I don't really know that you're a person.
Yeah.
Therefore, I'm not actually that concerned about respecting your autonomy and reputation. And so I feel fine being completely direct and saying, this is crazy and I'm correct.
I know. My impression is that that's absolutely correct. That concerns with face are definitely lessened in online environments, and I'm pretty sure that people have looked at that in various ways. I don't know exactly how, but my hunch is that there's data demonstrating that exact thing. But yeah, I think concerns with face are diminished in those contexts.
And I often think that even though we have this sort of prototype of online vitriol, when you bring people into the world of dealing with other people, I kind of think you wouldn't see anything that much different than the study that you ran years ago. Right? That I actually do care about other people when the environment reminds me that this is a goal that I have. And so I do think that there's a lot more hope for tolerant conversations when we, I guess this is an ethical question. Ought we respect others' image? Or is it really...
I think we have to. I mean, Goffman's, Durkheim's, their argument is that's the glue that holds us together. I mean, if you lose that, then we're just savages.
Which, have you been on the internet?
I know. I've heard.
Sounds about like how things are.
I know.
I'm curious, in that study, though, when you said that you wouldn't know that they disagree to some degree, is that like, did you have people listen to the recordings and like...
we coded.
And like, how strongly do they disagree or something?
Yeah.
But that was like a small team of coders. Yeah. It would be interesting to do something like that where then you ship it off to a bunch of people. And just say like, hey, listen to this. If you were to guess like what each person's attitude was, I think what your findings generally hint at is that people would be completely off, right? They would. So if you gave them a scale,
gave them a 7-point scale and compared their ratings, their perceptions, right, on that 7-point scale with the person's own ratings, they'd be way off, hugely off.
But your coders were more looking at just like, to what degree are they disagreeing? Like,
well, we were. So I came up with a scheme to capture what I thought was the important ways in which they were managing face while they disagreed. And so they weren't really looking, like the coders weren't really looking for that. They were looking for the things that I was telling them to look for in terms of linguistic strategies. But it is true that some people just basically agreed at this, even though they were on opposite sides. But that was relatively rare. That happened a couple of times. But people are concerned, I think.
Do you have advice for how to communicate better? You spent many years looking at how we use words and whether those words carry the meaning we want them to?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't. I wish I did.
You've learned
But
nothing.
I think with practice it's possible to simultaneously attend to multiple things. I think there are ways to there, and because there are people who do this. There are people who are skilled at giving criticisms. There are people who are skilled at persuading. There are people who are skilled at asking things, making requests. They're socially skilled. And I think what they're doing is they're simultaneously able to, attend to face and say things in a way. And I don't know what the magic formula is, right? I mean, I would love to know it, but get their attention, their intentions across.
Sounds great.
Yeah,
We could figure that out.
yeah. No, and that's really, yeah. I mean, that's really kind of as I sort of end my career, I've got an eye on more applied. So how, specific recommendations. And so we'll see. It's a work in progress.
No ideas.
Not really. I mean, you mean specific ideas like how to phrase. So, I mean, yeah, I can give you some specific, but so, I mean, take the obvious case of directives, of requests, right? Well, I want you to open that door. So, I mean, I could say, Andy, go open that door, right? And you would get the meaning, and you think, what a jerk. and so, but let's say I'm the sort of person that's really into protecting face, and so I go, Andy, it's kind of warm in here. So you go, yeah, it is. and right, and so you don't recognize my intent, right? And so the middle, so you search for some sort of middle ground, some sort of what linguists call conventionalized means. So, Andy, could you open that door? So I'm not commanding. I'm asking whether you have the ability to open that door, but you clearly recognize, right, that's what I'm after. So
somewhere between, right? Find
somewhere between.
Maximize.
Yeah. And a lot of it is in face to face. It's tonal. It's not all language, right? I mean, language is embedded within all this other stuff that we do. So it's so it's paralinguistic. It's nonverbal, and there's ways to soften, right? Smile, right? To soften threatening acts. But I don't have any clear answers because it remains something of a mystery. It remains a mystery to me how we're able to get from these words, the sequence of words, right, to basically reading another person's mind, right? And that's fascinated me. It will continue to fascinate me, and that is a huge issue. I mean, that is the fundamental problem for general AI. They cannot do that, right? There's lots of AI is amazing, and tremendous strides have been made. But that last leap from getting from these words to inside somebody's head, nobody's cracked that yet.
Yeah. Maya is 15 months ish at the time that we're talking. Okay. So she's right on the bubble, and there's this like moment where it's so clear that she's trying to communicate and she gets what we're saying, but it's not. It hasn't all locked in yet. No. So it's a super interesting time to be like, all right, like what do you get? Like when we say these things, is any of it like? Because it feels like language is all or nothing, right? Like I get it, right? This word carries meaning. I either know this word or I don't. But it's like that moment of figuring out how all of these rules work together. And I wanted to ask you about AI in the context of speech act theory. Yeah. Is there crossover there? Because it seems like that's an interesting opportunity for AI to develop modules that communicate, not just
AI
semantics.
Took a left turn about 20 years ago, and they went totally bottom up because you've got all this massive data now. And that's all it is now. I mean, I'm not an expert on this, so I'm sure there are people that are working top down as well. But the bottom up stuff, I mean, you know how good they are. You know how good Siri is and so on and so forth. They're pretty good. But they don't do what we're doing, right? But it's so, there's not energy being put in approaching language that way, communication that way. I think there could be. And I don't know that speech act theory would be the best way to go.
Well, I only think of it in terms of like, I'm not trying just to get this machine to know the meaning of what I've said, but like the intention behind me having said it, right? Like in the same way, if I were to say, hey, Siri, would you consider playing for me the last song on this album?
Right.
This machine might go, what?
Yeah, exactly. No.
Right. Rather than that direct command, like play this thing.
Right.
Or even like, I mean, sure, we can criticize our home devices. Right. I'm trying to think of what kind of speech acts would be even relevant in a case like this. But even if, I mean, I could imagine the desire to develop programs that themselves express things with intention, right? Like my goal is to request that you do something or to tell you to do something rather than inform you of something, right? Like I can tell you it's going to rain today, but I might really be trying to say, bring an umbrella.
Yeah. Exactly right.
And so there you might go like, ultimately, it makes sense that you'd want to build in not only like expressing true things, right? Like it's not linguistics of 150 years ago, like you were saying, where it's all about just like, is this true or is this not true? Right. But could we develop these programs to use these words to do things? Yeah. And to understand that words are to do things.
Yeah. No, it is intention recognition. And and we're not there. To me, that is the fundamental AI problem. And it's a mystery.
I'm sure they'll figure it out soon enough. Well, I wanted to say, I think we're good on time. But,
okay.
I just want to say thanks for taking the time to walk me through all this stuff.
Yeah, I loved it. Very fun.
All right, that'll do it for this week. Thank you so much to my friend and colleague, Tom Holtgraves, for chatting about the work that he's done over his career. To learn more about it, you can head to the webpage for this episode to get links to some of the studies we talked about and his book, Language as Social Action. For more about this podcast, you can go to opinionsciencepodcast.com for past episodes, transcripts, and other good stuff. Subscribe to the show wherever you get podcasts, and hey, tell a friend about the show. And this is a direct request. I'm not beating around the bush to protect face, none of this. Some people are saying it's nice to spread the word about podcasts they love. No, I'm commanding you. Yeah, no, that's unpleasant. It's unpleasant to be that direct. On that note, I'm wondering if you've thought about writing a review of Opinion Science online. I'm told that Apple Podcasts is a nice place to do that. All right, that's all for this week. I'll see you back here in a couple weeks for more Opinion Science. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, why are we doing this while you're sucking on a tomato? Okay, say bye-bye.
Bye.